And if you didn't do what was required by the regulations, you could be punished. You could have your food taken away. If you were a preacher, same thing. They punished you because the state was paying, the government, the crown was paying the ministers in the Anglican Church, the Church of England. In my research, I found that a third offense for not attending service could be punishable by death. And 8 people were executed by not attending church in Jamestown. Wow. That's a different kind of Christianity than what we're used to. Because we're Americans now. They were British. There's a picture of Jamestown, a painting. And then in 1620, we all know that story. The Pilgrims came over. They were religious. Oh, sure. They were very religious. They wanted to be left alone, but they didn't really want anyone else to be part of their group either. You couldn't participate in the governance of the Pilgrims in Plymouth, Mayflower Compact, all that kind of stuff, unless you were a member in good standing in the church. That's true. There they are. There's the compact. That's what it says. Have an undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith. Arguably, a theocracy. It didn't work. If it doesn't work with God at the head and you're trying to put a socialist type government together where everybody is supposed to pull their fair share, it doesn't work at all. If it doesn't work with God at the head, it doesn't work. And it didn't work. They gave it up after about 6 years because women got tired of washing other men's clothes, and other men got tired of watching certain people work hard while the others sat under the shade tree in the middle of the summer. So anyway, so that's what the church was like in New England with the Pilgrims. They were Puritan. They were Calvinist. Calvinist, I say Puritan, Calvinist. Reformed. Any Presbyterians in here? I love talking to Presbyterians. I'm not a Calvinist. I didn't like him. Neither did John Wesley. A whole lot. We'll talk more. I teach a lesson on Calvinism too. So the Massachusetts Bay Company comes in 1630. Same kind of deal. If you're not them, you are not welcome. You're not welcome if you're Baptist. You're not welcome if you're Quaker. You're certainly not going to be there if you're Catholic. You could be in trouble. There were 4 Quakers that were hung, including a lady in Massachusetts, because of their faith, because of their religion. And there's Winthrop. We've heard this before. It's great. It's a good rallying cry. Ronald Reagan resurrected it as a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us. And of course, Winthrop and Reagan didn't make that up. Matthew 5:14. Light of the world, city set on a hill, cannot be hidden. Roger Williams in 1635, he founded Rhode Island. Everybody talks about the Southern Baptist. No, that's not where the Baptists started in America. They were Northern Baptist. Ever heard of Northern Baptist? I hadn't either until I started doing all this research. So he founds Rhode Island. He gets along with the Indians. One of the reasons he didn't get along with the Puritans in Massachusetts Bay was he thought the Indians had been mistreated, and other people mistreated too. He just didn't like the so exclusive, right? You're not them, you don't count. Isn't that beautiful? I've had lunch right near there, my wife and I, years ago. That's Salem Harbor. You know Salem Harbor? Salem, Massachusetts. In the 1690s, about 150 people were indicted and jailed for being witches. This is Christianity in New England. Cotton Mather, probably the most famous preacher in Boston, he was part of it. This is not a pretty story. Christianity's beginnings in America is not a pretty story. And I think at least 15 were executed and maybe I've heard even as many as 20. Not pretty. This is important. Charles Curtis, when I did this on Wednesday night, he said, but what was it in England and why were they these different faiths? There you go. Does that help? We went from James the First, that's Anglican. Charles was. Then Oliver Cromwell takes over. He's Puritan. They go back to Anglican, and near his death, Charles II becomes, if he wasn't already, always Catholic. And then James II, Catholic. And then finally, William III and Mary, Anglican. And of course, that means no more Catholic monarchy in England. But that's the background in the 1600s. So that's where we were coming from. That's why we were the way we were. Look what happened in terms of the founding. I won't go through all of them. A lot of them were specific faiths. Some were only commercial, like New Hampshire, I think New Jersey, but they still were dominated by Anglican Church, the Reformed Church, the Puritans. Let's go down one more. I like these. I like the last two. In 1681, this guy named William Penn founded Pennsylvania. He had a charter, and he was a Quaker. And then in 1733, the 13th, and that's Georgia, with Oglethorpe, everybody was permitted to worship as they chose in Georgia from the beginning, except for Catholics. There's a reason. They didn't have a problem with Catholics per se. They had a problem with Catholics being attached to Spain. And Georgia was founded as a buffer between the Carolinas and Florida. And the Spanish were Catholic.
How do you define commercial?
For business. They wanted to make money. And that's a lot. All of them really did want to make money. Just about everybody, even the Massachusetts Bay Colony, was commercial, but it was done with Puritan and Calvinist faith. So it varies. Oh, there's William Penn. I wanted to hold him up at top of the city hall, right? He's on top of the city hall, and I wanted to hold him up as well as Oglethorpe, the last two. They were the ones that were most accepted of other people. And again, except for the Catholics for defense reasons, Georgia was probably the most, I hate to use the word progressive, that's got a bad connotation, but they were that way. You could worship about any way you chose in Georgia, including be Jewish. Because Israel, the synagogue that's here, is one of the oldest congregations in America. In my hometown. Forgot to tell you that. I grew up in Savannah. Wesley Monumental Methodist Church. There's the map. Remember this. You won't remember all of it. Up north, it's Puritan. Congregationalist, right? Anybody from New England? Congregationalist. They have those beautiful white churches, don't they? Okay. And then south, it's Anglican, which of course becomes, after the war, Episcopalian. All right. In the middle, you got a little bit of everything. And William Penn was, he was Quaker. If he accepted Quakers, he was pretty much going to accept pretty much anybody. Catholics founded Maryland, but it didn't last. Okay. The Great Awakening. How many people have seen the movie, The Great Awakening? Tell them to go see it. Go see the movie, and all you have to do is go to Amazon and pull up The Great Awakening, and I think you can rent it for about $5.
You can buy it.
Or you could buy it. I have yet to talk to anyone that's seen it that does not rave about it. And buddy, I rave about it. I really do. We're Methodists. It's about George Whitefield, and a slip, right? John Wesley, George Whitefield, and Benjamin Franklin, and we'll talk about it. How important what Whitefield did in this country that enabled us to break away from England. New Lights. It's just about like you would think it is. Happening in New England. This is my opinion. I don't know that I've ever read it. But if you kept shoving Puritanism down my throat every day, I don't think I could take it forever. John Adams couldn't. He grew up in a Puritan church before, I'm not even sure he reached adulthood. Before it was over, he was a member of a Unitarian church. Same church. The church changed. It used to be Puritan. The New Lights, though, in the early 1700s, they started preaching born again. Born again. Sound like Baptist. Some of them were. Jonathan Edwards was the most famous. He had a church in Northampton, Massachusetts, right on the Connecticut River. And it's quite a story. If we did the 3-hour version, we would let you listen to a little bit of his preaching. At least someone would pretend like he was John Edwards and preach. His most famous sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Never heard of it? That's his most famous. They're not all that way. He's a kind man, just like Whitefield. But sometimes it was fire and brimstone. No question about it. Whitefield. Oh, man. What do we say about George? He comes in 38. He comes to Savannah. Wesley's had already left. You know that story. John didn't do very well at all. No, he didn't. He wasn't even sure he's a Christian. You remember that story. I teach that lesson too, if you don't know. You know everything you think you know about Wesley, and every time I keep reading, I learn more. Whitefield, he comes 7 times to America. He loved America. 7 times. 7 times on those ships across the ocean. It wasn't Delta Airlines. There he is. Just like John and Charles, they got thrown out of the church. They're preaching born again. The Anglican Church, they weren't preaching born again. They were preaching, my words, sort of mundane, a little bit boring sometimes, not necessarily good preaching. Whitefield, captivating. He made all the difference. The preacher can make a difference. It shouldn't, but it does. He does. Ever been to Savannah? If you go south of Savannah, off of Ferguson Road, that is the entrance to Bethesda. It is currently a boys' school. In 1740, George Whitefield founded the first orphanage in America. He saw the need. That was Whitefield. Boy, orphans, prison, the poor. That was Wesley. Same thing. But he had a heart for these kids. He's decided he's going to build an orphanage. And he does. And he starts collecting money for it too. It's no longer an orphanage. It was when I was a child, but it's currently a boys' school. And if I remember right, not an exclusive boys' school. It's still for those in need, if you will. There's the movie. That's Whitefield. And there's Ben Franklin, because he comes to Philadelphia and he's preaching, and Ben had heard about him, and Ben meets him. I hate to give it all away. Most of the movie's really good, and they show the scene where Ben is outside his print shop on Market Street. Ever been? Philadelphia? My son's born on Ben Franklin's birthday. His name is Ben. He was named before he was born. How about that, huh? Yeah, he was born on his birthday on January 17th. Anyway, so Franklin's there. He meets Whitefield, and Whitefield starts to preach at the courthouse on 6th and Market. And Benjamin Franklin couldn't believe what he had heard about being able to preach to thousands and tens of thousands. So he starts walking back to the Delaware River until he couldn't hear him anymore. And then he did his calculations. Yeah. Over 30,000 people, he calculated, was listening to him that day. And that scene is in the movie. John Blair, the guy that I just showed you in that slide, I don't know who decided to pick him. I never heard Whitefield preach. I cannot imagine he would have been any better than John Blair doing Whitefield in that movie. His voice is phenomenal. Before we get there, oh, that's one of those churches. up in New England. It's actually in Massachusetts. Before we get there, I have the pleasure of introducing Benjamin Franklin. He is going to come up and read to you from his autobiography what he said and wrote about George Whitefield. So, Mr. Franklin, Dr. Franklin, you need the other kind of glasses.
I know.
Yeah, yeah.
And these aren't even mine. When Bruce asked me to do this, I didn't even think about the fact I didn't have my glasses. So we're going to see how we do. I've got lenses. But one other thing to mention. My dad is named Benjamin Franklin Shaw. So I'm almost legit. My middle name is Franklin. All right, we're going to see how we do here with Lennox glasses. I did not disapprove of the design of the orphanage in Georgia, but as Georgia was then destitute of materials and workmen, and it was proposed to send them from Philadelphia at a great expense, I thought it would have been better to have built the house at Philadelphia and brought the children to it. This I advised, but he was resolute in his first project, rejected my counsel, and I therefore refused to contribute. I happened soon after to attend one of his sermons, in the course of which I perceived he intended to finish with a collection, and I silently resolved that he should get nothing from me. I had in my pocket a handful of copper money, 3 or 4 silver dollars, and a few pistols in gold. As he proceeded, I began to soften and concluded to give the copper. Another stroke of his oratory made me ashamed of that and determined to give the silver. And he finished so admirably that I emptied my pocket wholly into the collector's dish, gold and all. At this sermon, there were also one of our club who, being of my sentiments respecting the building in Georgia and suspecting a collection might be intended, had my precaution emptied his pockets before he came from home. Toward the conclusion of the discourse, however, he felt a strong inclination to give, and applied to a neighbor who stood near him to lend him some money for the purpose. The request was fortunately made to perhaps the only man in the company who had the firmness not to be affected by the preacher. His answer was, "At any other time, friend Hopkinson, I would lend to thee freely, but not now, for thee seems to be out of thy senses." Some of Mr. Whitefield's enemies affected to suppose that he would apply these collections to his own private annulment. But I, who was intimately acquainted with him, being employed in printing his sermons and journals, never had the least suspicion of his integrity, but am to this day decidedly of opinion that he was in all his conduct a perfectly honest man. And methinks my testimony in the favor ought to have the more weight, as we had no religious connection. He used indeed sometimes to pray for my conversion, but he never had the satisfaction of believing that his prayers were heard. Ours was a more civil friendship, sincere on both sides, and lasted to his death.
He obviously was quite a powerful preacher. That is the church, the Old South Church in Newburyport, Massachusetts. That is where George Whitefield was to preach on Sunday, and he passed away early Sunday morning in 1770. So he preached, I think, from the steps of the parsonage the night before informally, and that's the last time he preached. He's there today. There's his grave. I had the pleasure of talking to a lady earlier this week, Janine Cunningham. She's a member of the Old South Church. We hit it off. We had a blast talking about Whitefield. And when she found out I was from Savannah, she thought that was great too, because Whitefield goes all the way from Savannah all the way up to Massachusetts. And he preached to, believed to be 80% of the colonists heard him at least one time. 80%. It was a breakaway from the Church of England because they were dissenters. That was the word that was used. He's actually there. This is why I called her. I had heard they had been grave robbers over the years, and there had been. He's under here. He's not missing. And that's a cast. I need to get over here so you can hear me. But that's a cast of the skull in the Bible. But that's where George Whitefield has been entombed, underneath the pulpit of Old South Presbyterian Church in Newburyport. Isaac Backus, a Baptist, he's in Massachusetts. Look what he says. Two kinds of government in the world. There's distinct, shouldn't be confounded together, one of which is called civil, the other ecclesiastical. He had it figured out, didn't he? Okay, so look at the time frame. You're starting to see some of the thinking of the Enlightenment. I like to talk about Ben Franklin a little bit before we keep going. Everybody likes to talk about, was he a Christian? Or really, they say he was a deist, wasn't he? Only if you have a different definition of deist than they perhaps might have had back then. Today, a deist created the world and lets it run. Benjamin Franklin did not certainly believe that. But he did believe in the value of religion. Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. And there's this creed. Look what he says. One God, the Creator, governs by his providence, ought to be worshiped. The most acceptable service that we render is doing good to his other children. The soul of man's immortal will be treated with justice in another life, respecting its conduct in this. I take to be the fundamental points in all sound religion. You could take Benjamin Franklin's writing here, his quote, and probably apply it, in my view, to John Adams. I told you he became Unitarian, even though his father had been a deacon in the Puritan church, and to Thomas Jefferson. And we'll talk about that later. That's Christ Church, the Episcopal Church in Philadelphia. He's buried. Ben is buried there. There's the churchyard. That's what it says. I'll read it from here. The body of Ben Franklin, printer, like the cover of an old book, the contents worn out and stripped of its lettering and gilding, lies here, food for worms. But the work shall not be lost, for it will, as he believed, to reappear once more in a new and more elegant edition, corrected and improved by the author. He wrote that when he was 22 years old. So someone gathered some money, put the plaque right outside the cemetery, and then you get to read that when you go to Philadelphia and throw a penny on Ben Franklin's grave. Okay, now we're celebrating the Declaration. All men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with inherent and inalienable rights. There are people in this country today that I don't think they like hearing that, but it's true. Where did it come from? The rights come from God. There is no question about it. There's no founder that even disputed it. I mean, you might have been a deist, but God still gave you the rights, not from government. And then you have the Enlightenment happening in the late 1600s, 1700s. We talked about the Baptists in New England. It has an impact on Jefferson, on Adams, and a lot of the founders. Okay, I'm going to go a little bit faster right here. John Locke is the one that matters most for us today. Montesquieu is very important. The division of powers, balance of powers within our government we got from Montesquieu was the Declaration, was John Locke. Thomas Jefferson read him. Oh, by the way, back to the Enlightenment and reason, Enlightenment and reason, they go together. Does that look familiar? Scripture, experience, tradition, and reason. That sounds like John Wesley's. Quadrilateral. Reason. John Wesley. Enlightenment. The same message, I think, from what I've read, and I've read, same message in England and in America. And the Anglican Church didn't like it. They didn't like it in America, and they didn't like it in England. That's why they kicked him out of the church, and he had to stand outside and preached off of his father's tomb. Remember that? Yeah, in Epworth. That's John Locke. Whew. I don't know. Brilliant man. Let's just say that. Okay. His influence in countless speeches, it talks about he influenced Adams and Washington, quotes Locke. They quote Locke almost verbatim concerning life, liberty, and property. This was great. I'll take time to read every word. His most famous writings, A Letter Concerning Toleration and Second Treatise of Government, most heavily influenced Thomas Jefferson. Much of the most memorable language of the Declaration of Independence is derived, or at least influenced, from Locke's work. The entire Declaration has been said to have succeeded admirably in condensing Locke's fundamental argument into a few hundred words. I've never read all of his work. I've read some of John Locke's work. It's there. Thomas Jefferson read it. He knew it. And he borrowed from it. Okay? There it is. Anybody not been in that room? It's got the green tablecloth and it's got the chair with the sun and Declaration. We just talked about it earlier. Thomas Jefferson wrote it. We talked about that. Got a lot of the ideas from John Locke. Great famous painting. You can tell it's the Declaration. Who's there? Adams, John Hancock, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin. There it is. 4 times in the Declaration is God mentioned. There they are. The laws of nature and of nature's God, that they are endowed by their Creator, the supreme judge of the world, and with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence. Now, that sounds like the Enlightenment language for God, but that's okay. It's still God, okay? There's no question about it. That's in the Declaration. Patrick Henry. People say, were the founders Christian? Oh, boy, was he Christian. He was devout. He was seriously Christian. Anglican, grew up Anglican from Virginia. You know that. Give me liberty or give me death. Concerning the Declaration, whether this will be a blessing or a curse will depend upon the use of our people, the use our people make of the blessings which a gracious God hath bestowed on us. Okay? Righteousness alone can exalt them as a nation. Man, we ought to read that a lot today, don't we? We need to. There's the Liberty Bell. You ask about what's the scripture? Well, the scripture's on top of the Liberty Bell. Old Testament. Leviticus 25:10. Proclaim liberty throughout all the land and to all the inhabitants thereof. So on the 8th, I think, of July, they rang the Liberty Bell. I don't know why they didn't do it on the 4th, but they didn't. They had their celebration on the 8th. By the way, in case you're wondering, New York actually did finally agree to independence. They voted for it, and officially on the 9th of July. So before everything got signed in August with all the signatures, because everybody knows not everybody signed on July 4th, John Hancock, he had his glasses, right? He wrote John Hancock. Anyway, this I found quite interesting. This is the peace treaty with the British after the war. It begins in the name of the most holy and undivided Trinity. Christian, not Unitarian, right? It having pleased the divine providence, and it's done in Paris the 3rd day of September, year of our Lord. By the way, if you don't know this Hartley guy, you're forgiven. If you don't know John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and John Jay, you're not so much. David Hartley was the Brit that signed it. So if you didn't know him, I get it. Different picture, different time, same place, 1787. Articles of Confederation don't work. We've won the war. We've got the peace. We're going to try again. Constitution. James Madison writes it. I made the mistake of saying that Jefferson's was only 1 page. Madison's was a lot longer. Well, it was. It was 3 pages. Because people tell you can put it in your pocket, right? You've seen them in your coat pocket. But it was 3 pages. It's about 3 times as many words as the Declaration. And Madison wrote it. I love Madison. guess what? He's there again. You can't get rid of him. You know, he wasn't there during the war because he went to France and all that, but he's back. He's how old is he now? 81. In 87, he's 81. He was 70 when it was the Declaration. And this time it's we the people, right? In order to form a more perfect union. Benjamin Franklin. See how important he is? I've lived, sir, a long time. The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth, that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall to the ground without his notice, it is probable that an empire can rise. Is it probable that an empire can rise without his aid? And he keeps going. He makes a motion. This is from James Madison's notes. That's why we know what happened. James Madison wrote lots of detailed notes from the Constitutional Convention. And he's asking for, without reading it, he's asking for the minister to open up the convention every day in prayer. It was seconded, that was discussed, but never voted on. They said they didn't have money to pay a preacher. I don't get it. There was a preacher that was there. Why couldn't he do the preaching? I don't know, but they didn't do it. And but at least Franklin brought it up, and to his credit. First Amendment. That's the closest thing we have to God. But in 1787, we didn't have a First Amendment. The Establishment Clause, right? Prohibiting the free exercise thereof, establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That wasn't there in 87. Not in the original Constitution. This was there, though. This is sort of cool. Article 1, Section 7, Paragraph 2. People say, we're not a Christian country. Well, I don't know. This is what it says in the Constitution. Of any bill should not be returned by the president within 10 days. Sundays accepted. Why would you accept Sundays? Why?
Church.
Because everybody goes to church. So that is in the Constitution. So you can probably win a bet on that one. So September 17th, they're done, except they're not done. Madison's got lots of work to do. But Franklin, he looks at the chair and he says he didn't know if it was a setting sun or a rising sun, but now at length I have the happiness to know it is a rising and not a setting sun. And that was the sun on top of George Washington's chair. Who chaired was the president of the convention. Mrs. Elizabeth Powell of Philadelphia. She was good friends with Benjamin Franklin and George Washington. She was a mover and a shaker. And she asked Mr. Franklin, as he leaves the State House, Mr. Franklin, do we have a monarchy or a republic? And there's the answer. A republic, if you can keep it. Madison, lots of work left to do. John Leland and Madison. Who's John Leland? He's a Baptist preacher. He comes down from Massachusetts in 1775, and to my knowledge, the rest of his ministry, he was in Virginia. From Fredericksburg all the way over towards Orange County, where Montpelier is, where Madison lived. They got to be good friends. Madison, in his youth, saw Baptist ministers jailed in his hometown. They were persecuted and prosecuted. And he saw it, and it just was not something that he could stomach. So he befriended Leland and vice versa. They had to be elected to be the delegates to Richmond for the Virginia Constitutional Ratification Convention. It was not a certainty that Madison, even though he had written the Constitution, was going to be elected to go. But the Baptists made sure he did go. So Leland mobilized the church, as good American citizens that they are, and they made sure they got out the vote. And they voted, and Madison was there, and thank God he was. George Mason. I like George Mason a lot, but he caused a lot of trouble for Madison, but he did a lot of good things for America. He said, you've got to have a Bill of Rights. Madison didn't think he needed it. George says, you got to do it. He didn't sign the Constitution. He was one of several, but especially George Mason. He was a neighbor of George Washington, lived right down the Potomac, about another 10 miles down. Big landowner. There's a museum there. His house is still there. Museum's there. He is the father of the Bill of Rights. Even though it was Madison that really did it, it's because of Mason that it got done. So they go, Patrick Henry. Oh, yeah. Patrick Henry, great Christian. Didn't like the Constitution. He thought it was going to give the federal government too much power. So they have the ratifying convention, and he never voted for it. Ratifying convention, June 26th of 88. The vote was 89-79. So if you think the Constitution is not perfect, that's as good as we were going to get. By 10 votes, only 10 votes did Virginia vote for it. I'm telling you, you wouldn't have had a Constitution without Virginia. Technically, you could have, but practically no way. Wasn't going to happen. The center of the power was Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, New York, Virginia. 10 votes. There's a lot of things we didn't like at the time, but we couldn't do any better at the time within 10 votes. Madison said, I will promise. I will promise. They didn't have still the Bill of Rights, but I will promise I will introduce them. He did. He's a congressman from Virginia. They convene Congress in 89. He introduces the Bill of Rights. It was originally 12. It's changed to 10. It's ultimately ratified by the states on my birthday, December 15th, but not 1791 for me, but it was 1791 for the Bill of Rights. Really was my birthday. I think that's cool. Virginia, again, the 10th state to ratify. Needed 10, 3/4, right? Remember, 3/4 needed to amend the Constitution. That's what you needed. Didn't need it for the other, but you had to have it for the ratification of the Constitution. George Washington. How much time do I have? 10 minutes? I can do this. Depends how many questions you ask me. What would we do without him? The miracles? Are you familiar with the story? He writes about it. He's fighting with General Braddock, French and Indian War. They're heading over towards Pittsburgh, and they're attacked. Braddock's killed. Washington comes back and tries to rally and, to fight again. By all powerful dispositions of providence, I have been protected beyond all human probability and expectations. 4 bullets through my coat, 2 horses shot under me, yet escaped unhurt. Although death was leveling my companions on every side. That's what he wrote to his brother John. Very famous preacher at the time, Samuel Davies, Presbyterian Church in Hanover. I beg leave to point the attention of the public to the heroic youth, Colonel George Washington, whom I cannot but hope Providence has preserved for some great service to his country. That has got to be the biggest understatement in the history of America. But hope Providence has preserved for some great service to his country. This is 1755. He's not leading the army yet. He's not leading the Constitutional Convention. He was different than everybody else. He was held higher. Maybe only the Franklin, I guess, maybe right below him. The date's wrong, but there's the quote. Smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. It says 1769. It's not. It's 89 when he was first inaugurated. Our first president served 2 terms. We know that. Anyway, Washington was an Anglican, then became Episcopalian. There's no question in reading our history, he was Christian. There's the church, Christ Church, same name as the one that Benjamin Franklin went to. Different church. This was in Old Town Alexandria, and there's Washington's box pew. Okay, in Old Town Alexandria. John Adams, we've already talked about John. He went to Harvard. He thought about being a preacher. Decided to become a lawyer. Any lawyers in here? There's a couple? Oh, is it you? Oh, okay. So I could do my lawyer jokes. But what's the difference between lawyers and preachers? There's a lot of talent that's similar, isn't there? Courtroom? Pulpit? He picked lawyer. He did good. Thank goodness for John Adams. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people, wholly inadequate to the government of any other. I agree.
Bruce, was John Adams like Hubert Humphrey, maybe?
Oh, I don't know. Depends on whether or not you like Hubert Humphrey. John Adams, by his own admission, remember he gets Thomas Jefferson to write the Declaration because he says, you write great and everyone hates me. So I don't know that I hated Hubert Humphrey, but John Adams thought everybody hated him. But he was a Puritan and had a great wife, Abigail, and tireless worker for America. I mean, he was 90 years old, I think, when he died, always serving. There's his church. It's now Unitarian Church. It became Unitarian in 1750 when John Adams went there. I'm telling you, I don't think it's a good idea to try to shove certain religion down people's throats. God doesn't. Jesus didn't. The Puritans did. It doesn't work. They became Unitarian. Okay. Thomas Jefferson. Was he a Christian? Was he a deist? What was he? He says he's a Christian. I got a book here I can show you. Really can't hardly pass it around, but here it is. This is a regenerated copy of the Jefferson Bible, as it's called, The Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. Now raise your hand and know about this Bible. You know about it. What's missing? Miracles. No miracles. One of the saddest things. I'm serious about this. You could preach a sermon on this. One of the saddest things. There laid they Jesus and rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre and departed. That is the last scripture in this book. The saddest thing I think I've ever read. Wow. That's Jefferson. He claimed to be a Christian. He loved Jesus, but not like we love Jesus. He simply did not think he was divine. He thought he was a great prophet. He thought he was the greatest moral teacher that had ever walked the earth. He grew up Anglican. He attended church. He attended church as president, and church was held in a couple of places, but specifically in the House of Representatives at the Capitol. And Jefferson was always there. There's a copy of the book. Picture of the book, Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth. There it is on the inside. 4 columns, one in Greek, one in Latin, one in French, and one in King James English, King James Version, in case you wanted to know what version. Of course, it was King James. What else could it have been back then, right? We hear over and over today about the wall of separation between church and state. I'd like to call it a wall of protection. And I think Jefferson's intent was exactly that. Let me see if I have that for you quickly. I have it somewhere. How come I can't get what I want when I want it? There it is. President Jefferson, this is 1803. He receives a letter from the Dansbury Baptist Association in Connecticut. And they were concerned about being persecuted by the state of Connecticut, who had as their official religion Calvinism, Puritan. So Jefferson responds, the Establishment Clause is a wall between church and state, protecting the Baptist, as there should not be an official religion, Puritan or otherwise. Many other states had similar religious restrictions, and most of them, shortly after the Constitution, they would be repealed. Finally, it took Connecticut a long time. New England's stubborn, 1818. And Georgia, if you were Catholic, you could worship in 1777, and you had full rights. You could even run for office as a Catholic in Savannah in 89, after the Constitution was ratified and the Bill of Rights approved. So they believe that Jefferson was against the church or something. He was not by any means. He simply didn't want the church dictating their particular brand of whatever their beliefs might happen to be. He closed the letter to the Dansbury Baptists. I reciprocate your kind prayers for the protection and blessing of the common Father and Creator of man. Thomas Jefferson said he was a Christian. I don't think he's a Christian, but he certainly believed in God. He was moral. And he knew it was required, as did Franklin, as did all of them, required for America to succeed. I can't tell you much about James Madison's faith. He was a very, very private man. Most of his personal writings, I think, were destroyed. His notes from the Constitution, his official papers are around. It's hard to know. He grew up Anglican, 30 miles above Monticello. So he and Jefferson were friends. He's a lot younger than Thomas Jefferson, but they're friends. And so he goes, he's raised Anglican. He has Anglican tutors. He goes to Princeton. He's there when John Witherspoon is president. They're good friends. Presbyterian, Anglican Presbyterian. I can't tell you any more than that about what he believed, other than what everyone else that were the founders believed, and that is freedom to worship as you choose. The First Amendment was what Madison believed, and they all believed. And that's what he says. No question he believes in God. More than that, I can't tell you. Okay? French Revolution. What a disaster. 1789. They tried to do the same thing we did, except for one detail. The church and state were just like this. The enemy was not only the monarchy, it was the Catholic Church. And for about a decade, it was total chaos and bloodshed. It did not work. I could put a picture of Napoleon up here to prove my point. Alex de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, very famous. He comes in 1831, and he's struck by the religious aspects of the country. It takes no direct part, religion, in the government, but it must be regarded as the first of their political institutions. Give me a couple more minutes here. Not until I went to the churches of America and heard her pulpits aflame with righteousness did I understand the secret of the genius and power. He had not heard that in France. I'm not so sure they heard it in England either until the Wesleys in Whitefield got there. America's great because she's good, and America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. We should hear that more than we do. July 4th, 1826. So Saturday, when we celebrate the 250th anniversary, we can also remember these two men. Everybody knows the story. God did it. That's what everybody said. Jefferson dies at Monticello at 1 o'clock. And Adams dies in Quincy at his home at about 6:30. Saying a little bit before then, Thomas Jefferson lives. And Thomas Jefferson had already died. Within hours of each other. Had to be God. That's what John Quincy Adams said. That's what everyone said when they found out that they had died on July 4th, 50 years to the day. He was a praying man. There are witnesses that saw Washington pray and pray at Valley Forge. This is a very famous painting and fairly recent. It wasn't painted until 1975. I love it. When the president's praying, you got a chance. You got a chance. Any questions? All right. We did pretty good. We did pretty good 3 hours of whatever. You can always feel free to ask questions anytime. Just send them to me, call me. I'll send out my email and stuff.